All right, guys, thank you for joining us here. This is pilot episode for the Listening Game podcast. And if you're looking for more information about what exactly this is about, you can find a dedicated YouTube video on my channel and go take a look at that. But we are super excited to have our guest here. This is none other than Wade Dreadnaught Penfold. Dude, thank you for being here with me. I'm super stoked. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be a part of anything. And honestly, I think it's a concept that is something that you and I have talked about, over the years of being friends, of like the whole empathy and the two-way relationship of a developer. And I think that this whole concept is super, super cool. So honestly, I'm honored to be a part of it.
Dude, thank you, man. And it's been a long time coming, this effort. I'm just really glad it's actually here. Who knows what will come of it? You know, these pilot episodes are a good showing, I think, of what I hope to accomplish with this podcast. But we're all going to learn and grow, and maybe the world's ready for it. Maybe it's not. We'll find out soon. But regardless, we got some talking to do, and I'm super stoked to get through that stuff with you. Of course, my background with you, Wade, is through the esports scene as it relates to Blizzard specifically. But ever since I first met you, I've been hyper impressed by your drive, your tenacity, and of course your contributions to esports in general, specifically through Heroes of the Storm and in reference to Blizzard, because that was my viewpoint.
Yeah.
But obviously that's grown quite a bit over the years, and I just want to dive into all of that. I want to hear about it. I want to hear your thoughts on the industry, all of those things, and we'll get to it piece by piece. But in general, just thank you for being here. Thank you for believing in me, and thank you for giving this a shot. So we're super stoked. But let's just start, man. Let's talk about games. This is all about games. I want to know what games you're playing right now. How are you spending your time in your free time?
I have no idea for anybody viewing this at what timeline that would be. But right now, Halo just came out, the Master Chief for PC. So that has been you knew this, but that was the first game that stole my life, right? And that makes it sound so bad, but it really was the first game to truly suck all ounces, I felt like, of my attention that was anywhere near voluntary. All went to a certain area of life, and that was with Halo 2 and 3. So that's been the most recent one, with it coming out, being able to kind of relive the nostalgia in 12-year-old Wade. That's been the majority of it. And then, bits and pieces of Rocket League's always a game that I will dabble in and always play in here and there. Once in a while, it's Heroes and just MOBAs in general. So League is another that I really enjoy out of the MOBA market. So those have probably been my core games right now, if I have any.
How old were you when the Halo thing hit you? You said Halo 2, 3, right?
Yeah, Halo 2 was the
How old were you? This is giving your age.
Okay, so when I got to play it myself, or when I started, when I heard about it? Because
how old were you when this sort of obsession over this specific title hit you?
So I was in 7th and 8th grade, so I think 12, 13 is probably the timeline around that. It was something that I was super interested in. I lived in Wyoming most of my life, and my friends would play it. My parents were pretty strict on what games I could play. I very much adhered to if it was teen. If I wasn't a teen, I couldn't play that kind of game and model. So my friends all played Halo, clearly with an M. I couldn't touch it. And then so it got to the point where I would see it, and I had interest in it. And once in a while at a friend's house, I'd have that rare occasion to be able to play it. One of them had System Link, and it was the first time I got to play against humans in a game. And that was really, honestly, it was a mixture of playing against humans mixed with, I think, the taboo-ness of it. It was a game I couldn't touch at first, right, because of the fact it was M. All those elements made it very appealing. I convinced my parents to allow me to have it, and then we moved to Florida. And so the mixture of an environment shift, right, and feeling massively, I think, out of place and not really having, what is home, mixed with the eagerness to finally take on humans for what felt like some of the first, innovative moments of gaming online, all at the same time led to I couldn't get enough. It was my community, and everything was just getting home, playing Halo, smashing kids, and then feeling better about myself. That was it.
That's awesome. And that would all happen relatively locally, right? In terms of, were you using local connections? Because I know initially it started that way with Halo, but you were actually connecting online.
Yeah, so it was the original Xbox Live is when I got it. You could do some I think there were some System Link loopholes, right? Where you could connect.
You connect boxes, like a LAN.
Yeah.
And in fact, we had a bunch of parties where we had TVs upstairs, TVs downstairs, and wires run through the house and stuff like that. But playing online obviously was next level for sure.
Yeah, no, it was honestly, I don't know how to describe it, at least for me personally. It changed gaming. Games were interesting and absolutely something I spent a lot of time on, but it wasn't until I got the cleverness of like that, what if he does this, but what if he does this, but what if he does this, like in a moment and without it being turn-based, I think is another element that had to shift. Those two things really made me suddenly go like, this, it just took my automatically, naturally competitive personality and gave it another, kind of avenue to channel it.
Yeah. And, I'm curious about that. You mentioned your parents and their perspective on these things. It's something that even as a parent, I'm super fascinated by. What was their response to that kind of bug that hit you? Like, were they worried? You said that maybe they relaxed some of they initially weren't letting you convinced them to let you have an Xbox, but how did that play out? How did they take to this? I think even now, as a parent, it's a question I have, like where those boundaries should be drawn.
I don't think you're alone. I actually cannot tell you how many times like I'll get in an Uber, the standard conversation, like, what do you do, and like they'll suddenly have a lot of interest. And my kid plays these all the time, right? That's something we hear all over. And a lot of them ask my experience of being parented with interest in gaming as to like your success story. Mm-hmm. So I want to know what you think about this, right?
Because you're on the other opposite side. Yeah. The concept that comes into parents' mind is that like, oh, my degenerate kid is going to end up X, Y, and Z. Yeah. But you're an example of the other side, so therefore you must know.
Yeah, you've got the holy grail answer, right? So how my parents took it, number one, was my parents were on the more strict side. If anything, it would be unfair to say that my parents were against gaming. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's a fair statement, right? Like, because there are clearly people who are more strict than myself. But like, I couldn't watch Power Rangers as like a 6-year-old because it's too violent, right? Mm-hmm, right? And those are things that most kids my age, at this age of 6, like would consume Power Rangers. So they were just genuinely strict over the graphic or violence of content that I would be getting into, and that was what stopped them. Right. Gaming wasn't that interesting to them and wasn't something that they like adored. And like even when we were younger, we argued over our SNES, and my dad literally sold it. Like he told us he threw it away, but he sold it. So like they weren't for it, but they weren't against it. And I think for me, like if I was to give you advice and like everybody else, and like what is my parents got to the point where it's like I did sports year round. Yeah. I never was not doing a sport. I never was struggling whatsoever in schooling. And that was all I did in my spare time. So it was one of those, like, if you were, getting out and socializing, you were educationally succeeding. It's like, why would you, like, it feels like diminishing the entertainment time through games is only more prone to getting them into the things you never wanted them to. I see. Like, that's how I view it. Sure. It's like, so I would strongly suggest, like, clearly make a well-rounded human being, promote learning a little bit of everything. But if that's the avenue they're going, then like, why choke it out? Because I think if anything, it's more likely to come back.
We talk a lot, or I get in conversations a lot about parents to kids, but I'm always curious, especially for folks who have a strong sense of self-introspection, which is definitely you, given how my experience of you. What was that like for you, processing the amount of time and commitment you're putting towards games? Was there ever a point where you were like, man, should I be doing this? How did you wrestle with the pressures of both the expectations of your parents, the idea of what it meant to be successful? Like, did that ever cross your mind? Were you ever even concerned that you should moderate this more, or
didn't. Like, just were now that you say that, I'm concerned.
Like, no. I find it fascinating because I think I always kind of wrestled with those things too. With like this constant sense of like, no, I want to be a good kid, I want to do the right thing, but like, am I putting too much time to this? I obviously want to. Yeah. I'd sink everything into this thing, right? But like, I'm just curious if there was ever a sense of self-moderation on that.
I think I was, whether it be the ignorance and kind of naivety to like be able to ignore that, or like I think that could have been a factor on like why I never thought of it. But to some extent, I think it was, I never put all my eggs in the gaming basket, right? Like I genuinely always had some other form of competition or some other form of something pretty heavy that was bigger than me that I was a part of, that I think allowed me to kind of avoid that for the most part.
Let's talk about that. So you mentioned that you were competitive in sports. Yeah. I know baseball is a big part of your life. Talk to me about that, because I'm curious how this side of your experience, especially with team sports, relates to the competitive side of team play, which MOBAs and the like, which you clearly had some experience in. Would love to hear your perspective on team sports and what that part of your life was like, and if you feel like there was overlap there in terms of the kinds of games you gravitated to, all of those things. Like, is there some corollary there?
I definitely think traditional sports have a lot when it comes to, I would even argue, like, not even just like competitive team version of gaming. Like I think sports have a lot to teach about life just in general through a lot of different things, and each game may have a strength that it will teach you a little bit better, like a life lesson that sport itself could maybe teach a little bit stronger. But all of them do teach, I think, a sense of a lack of ego to some extent, right? Like it can't be a part of the team if you think you're the only hot shot, right? Like, and like how quickly you can sometimes like have that coach humble you in front of everybody, right? As like an example, whether it be for better or for worse. And so that I feel like it teaches you to be a part of something that's a little bit bigger than you, be less focused on yourself, and also just kind of have, I think, a bit of a more reality check on yourself more consistently. And I think there's a lot of other dynamics too. But I've always been a huge believer of like, I didn't realize how valuable I think some of the things I learned through sports have been in just existing in life after that point. Maybe even some of the most valuable things that I had learned.
I'm curious, like, what would be the one thing you feel like physical sports could bring to the table or teach competitive esports?
Yeah.
Like if there was one value you feel like is so, I guess, tangibly felt, and maybe it is that team piece and the value of the individual contributor versus the whole, but like if there's one learning that you wish could carry over or be more felt within whether it's the ecosystems that are raising teams or building teams, or even how teams themselves in their sort of self-taught, self-fostered nature could kind of hold on to and make themselves stronger. Like, what would that be?
I think it would have to be related to the ego, and I don't know if it would be as much of a lesson as at least like a direction of impact like that I would like to see it have. But it is that ability to look at things big picture and understand your place within it, and having pride within your place within that, because you are a part of a massive system, right? And I think I think gamers in general very more often than not are taught to focus on themselves and have actually naturally selfish tendencies. It's actually what typically promotes them to be good at gaming in the first place and then thriving in those type of environments. And so I think that level of being able to not necessarily socialize very heavy in those kind of elements, I feel like you can, with traditional sports, and being able to have that, this is my place in the system, and being a part of the system is something I can be proud of. And it's like, look at what this system is doing, and understand that this system, you remove me, this system does falter, or at least is hindered. And being able to get that pride in that picture, I think would lead to just overall healthier gaming mentality and just better gamers due to them being able to, again, view themselves, I would say, not only more realistic, but I think a healthier manner too.
Yeah, it's like having, it's something, I think you and I have jammed on this in the past, but I feel like there's something innate to physical sports, and it's probably the natural humility required by your physical body sort of being at stake in the effort and alongside your comrades, where there are limitations, man. I can only run so fast. I can only do this thing so fast, and maybe others are a little bit better than me, but I will break down physically if I don't have the support of this person backing me up, or if I make a mistake, this person has me, right? Yeah. It's so, like, the physicality is so ingrained in the lessons that you can learn there. And I do think there is almost a need to overemphasize those elements in a digital expression of collaboration and teamwork. And, this is this interesting thing, and I'd love to dive into this at some point, but like, how do we foster stronger teams? And, what are methodologies in which, the weaknesses of the way we foster competitive gaming can be strengthened, I think is fascinating to me. Yeah. And I often wonder if it's that element of shared physicality, because you can be so separate. And like you said, gaming almost gives you this false sense of self-value being heightened, because you're by yourself, you're at your computer, you're in your own room. Yeah. Even if you're playing with a team, it's really filtered through that lens. Yeah. And it's almost like you have to actively work against that, or put more energy into perceiving the natural kind of lessons that would come in a physical manifestation of team, right?
And I don't even know if it goes away immediately. Like, as a guy who's lucky enough to play at a couple of LANs, right? Yeah. Like, live in a gaming house even. Like, I've had the environment of, but what if the physical player is sitting right next to me, right? Like, does that change some level of intimacy of that relationship as we practice, as we try and get better? And at least from my experience, the answer was like, not really. Yes, there is some shift, but like, it doesn't naturally promote those same things as well as traditional sports. And I think that's where the physical pain translates to emotional bonding later, right? And that's something that you never got and you never get in gaming. Like so much so that like, you know, clean slate, I get to do whatever I want. I have $1 million. I've run my own, okay, a couple mil, let's be real. It's an expensive industry. But either way, I've got my own team. I do whatever. I probably would heavily promote a physical interaction of just overcoming obstacles and challenges of people together that I personally believe would translate, given enough time, over to their ability to have faith in one another within a game.
I've often envisioned that too, where it's like, even if it was just a regular exercise schedule that you were doing as a team that involved, you know, I think about what CrossFit has done with like team, sort of team exercise, where it's like, I do this thing and we slap hands and then you do the next thing. Like there's something about that, just that shared physicality that I think, like you said, it bonds, it builds trust, it makes you feel your limits more rather than like, I don't limits. I don't got limits. I got no latency in my mouse. I got this, right? What are you talking about limits, dude, right? And I almost wonder, like you said, I think that is this missing component to how you can get more out of like what it means to be a team, right?
No, I think there is a very weird element brewing, like in esports in general, of like the promotion of the individual in gaming, and generally, at least, it's changing, but at least culturally speaking, it was the isolatory human being that was more prone to being that human being, and that those are more prone to having the time to being that pro gamer, which then goes, okay, so now that you've isolated and succeeded on your own for hundreds of hours and had the world promote your ego to being you doing what you do, I would like you to set that aside and join these 4 other people so we can try and compete for a specific amount of money. That isn't going to happen. That is not an easy task. I think it's daunting. And I do think it is shifting because culturally gaming is shifting to be younger and more open to more audiences, which is making I think just our ideas of what it means to be online and gaming is shifting a little bit too. But I've always found the back and forth between the individual and the team and how do you help solve that is really interesting without the physicality of sports. And I don't think it's just location, like because you can't put them all in the same room and I think change the outcome. Super
interesting, and I want to dive in more specifically to your experience, like getting into Symbiote and professional gaming in general. But talk to me about. I want to hear your super broad, wide level. What do you think the value is in games? I think there's this interesting conundrum that I have when I think about my kids, or should they be playing games? Like, why on earth games? Like, should this be a priority, and why is it important as a priority? Like, where does it fit? I think there's this element of, I don't even know that I have the answer, and that's super weird for a dude who works in this industry. Like, I'm committing my whole life to the thing that I'm like, where does it really fit? Like, how valuable is it in the grand scheme of life? Like, I mean, there are people starving, and the environment and all these things, and yet games. Like, you know what I mean? Like, why? What's the value there?
For me, I think there's 2 layers to that. So I'll go with the first one is interactive storytelling. I think that is absolutely, storytelling is core to being a human being. Literally since the beginning of time, we've been telling stories as a way to transfer information, set morality and ethics within culture. Like it's a huge part of who we are. But that ability to make a story a 2-way relationship is something I find very interesting. Like, what was it? Bandersnatch, right? Well, that was the name of it. From Netflix. Having the choose your own path story within a film was like, it's not like we haven't heard this before. Growing up in elementary school, you had a million choose your own direction like type stories, but being able to get that in a different medium and like watching that interaction and it almost becoming a relationship, I find beautiful, and it's being done in multiple ways. Like it's even done, like I would argue, things like House of Cards has that with their attempts to break the fourth wall, and a lot of shows are looking at a camera as if you're a person who's partaking in this event that doesn't even exist and it, right? And I think interactive storytelling is one of the most engaging elements of being people that I think games do probably better than almost anybody else, and that's been the core idea behind them for the most part since the beginning of time. It's like, you get to have a relationship with this story as it develops and function with it. And I really enjoy that aspect. Awesome. The other side of like just gaming in general that I'm a believer in, and I don't think gaming is the only one that could do this, but it's the one that did it for me and I can talk to the most, is I'm I'm a big believer in like having hobbies and activities that promote a lack of what I'm going to say just autopiloting. It's very easy to get into a mental slumber almost, and it just exist in the world without really putting mental strain towards something. And I think TV promotes that kind of even more so, with less emotional investment and engagement towards it, and not very much thought. And so for me, having a hobby that can not only the beauty of that storytelling, but also promote me, and I don't think you should do this all the time because you got to relax your brain once in a while, but to have this level of like, I could give it my all and it's going to give me the same thing back, right? If I want to AFK a game, I can, and I'll probably get the feeling I wanted out of that engagement. But if I want to go, I know the relationship to movement speed of this character is 10%, which should, in theory, because he's melee and the range gap here, like how does this relate to the game itself? And like, if I want to get into that, I probably can see a value on that too. And it's like, how much studying and Wikipedia reading can you do on Doctor Who before you can really, you know, I think hit that level of appreciation. And I probably shouldn't have said that because I've never watched Doctor Who, and I know there's like a super avid fan base. Like that is some of the most like you know faithful. But I think you get the idea.
No, like you're almost getting into the DNA of the thing, and like the amount of energy and effort you're putting into dissecting it at that pace is rewarded to you.
Exactly. I think the only other element I find that are sciences, right? So, and even then it has a point where you go, well, nobody knows. You know, you hit that point where it will hit that cap. And within games, at least then I can go, but I can be that guy, the first one to answer it. Or at least
you're all the way at end game in that sense. Like we're at the atomic level. I got it. You know what I mean? Like I can't go further than the atom. At least I know it all, right? Like and like not many people are on that journey. And I think that is something that I find super fascinating about your time on Heroes, is I think you always stood out to me as the individual who was diving deeper into these meta layers of like, no one even thought about that. Like I didn't even think about this, the timing it took for this to happen before, you know, that, and how that would affect how our team should make decisions. And I think that makes good sense, man. It's like, it's an interesting idea to think that games they reward you for the amount of energy you want to put into them, essentially. The amount of depth that you want to know them, depending on the game. You know? But there are certainly games like StarCraft or these MOBAs, right, that certainly reward your desire to dive deeper, right? That's super cool, man. Well, let's talk about it, dude. So when did you make the shift towards deciding you wanted to play at an extreme level in these games, and even, you know, manifest that on stages and the like, or join teams that had names, like, you know, what was that transition? Was it through the mobile landscape? Was it Halo? Like, where did it all begin for you? And then let's carry that on through into the hero stuff.
So I think a you know, broad stroked version of that would be absolutely Halo and MLG when that was coming up, you know, 12, 13-year-old me that was the game that took my soul, mixed with being able to watch people play. Like Walshy's a name that like little me would have just like been like, wait a minute, you have met Walshy, right? And so so that started it, but it wasn't until the LCS with League of Legends. So that at some point some friend got me into WoW. I started PC gaming for the first time. Then we see League of Legends come out. I start playing that early on. LCS comes on. And I'm immediately a pretty big fan. That being said, I never took League very serious as a game. Like, I want to be a pro. It was just, I loved the game. I enjoyed it. So I quickly was like, clearly no opportunity to play professionally here, but I could be a caster. I might be able to do that. And, you know, I've been lucky enough that, you know, since puberty, people sometimes hear me and be like, oh, you have a voice, like, you know, and so you have a voice, you should depend on that or do something with that. And so just mainly the people saying, hey, maybe you should do something about that, mixed with the I love games so much and knowing basically I'll never be a league pro was like the thought process.
Wow, so the idea of actually being on the camera side was before the idea of being a player?
Be a player, can't be a player. It's like those who can't do teach gym, right? Like those who can't play, commentate, right? And so then I was like, okay, well, if I can't play, I'll commentate. But then Heroes came out, and I was like, well, I'll just play this for fun, not that serious or anything. And to be honest, like the pro player status kind of, not the pro player, but like the being a leader in that scene kind of fell on my lap. It was a very lucky circumstance of responding to one Reddit post just because I wanted to play as a 5-man team with an organized comms because I wanted to know what the game felt like when it was taken serious.
Yeah.
So
it was built around that idea so heavily.
Exactly. Yeah. So like what happens when it's played as it should be, right? And I enjoyed it. And then it turned out like literally 2 weeks later, there was about nobody in the game that you could find that could really take our group already. And there was very little practice going behind that. 6 months down the road, story's still the same tale. And I was like, wait a minute here, right? Like 6 months of basically clapping everybody, you're probably in a pretty good position to hold your own. And that's when, okay, maybe I should try and be a pro player in this game. And then that's when I started taking it more seriously. Eventually, the road to BlizzCon mixed with Tempo Storm sponsorship comes in and the kind of tale of, of like me as a player, right? And then once that World Championship comes to a close, that's when I decided to take a step back and then move more towards the commentary. And then it's funny because that's derived from like the original of like the neglect of a player. I wanted to be a commentator, and that's what I thought I could do. And relying on that natural instinct that people are like, you have a voice, you should try and do something with that. So
was that first team Symbio, or would you bounce?
The first roster I joined was Symbio Gaming. So like we joined. So I joined this roster, right? Yeah. Ko was on that, who was one of my, for anybody watching who has no idea, Ko was a long friend, a best friend of mine, who was on the team, and he was on the team the entire duration. He was one of the originals. And so was Arthlon, actually. Arthlon. So those two were the original. Us 3 out of the 5 met that day through that Reddit post. Within 2 weeks, we kicked the other 2 members. We found another one, which was Soldier, came into the picture. Wow. And and Zuna didn't come in until Tempo later on. But like that first 4-man roster actually ended up finding each other within 3 weeks of responding to that one post. And 3 of us found it on the initial, me literally just launching my name into a post going, this is never going to equate to anything.
Yeah. Man, that is so interesting, dude. How funny life is, in that way, right? It's like so interesting because you guys clearly, especially the caliber of the players that you're mentioning, right? There's no doubt they were just fascinating. One Reddit post where it could have been anybody, right? And you guys are all together. That's pretty darn cool. Well, I want to hear more about your journey as a player, and I know you took on a captain role. How much of that was natural, would you say, and how much of it was just like, oh, we need a captain because this tournament requires it? Like, and how big of a deal was that even to your team? Like, what was it?
Super interesting. These are the right questions.
Yeah, I'm really curious about it because, like we said, or we talked about previously, I'm fascinated by esports, especially team esports, because the natural perception around leadership is an interesting one, right? Because by nature, we all like to think we're great players and we have a lot to contribute, but then who gets to make the calls? And in a game like Heroes, shot calling is really, really important, and unified trust in those calls, or maybe even the amount of experience to know what call is the natural one that we would make as a team right now, which comes with time, right? Yeah. I'm just curious what that was like for you and how that came about, and what are the learnings you've had from being in a position like that?
Yeah, so I got into that role. Let's go with it was, to some of it was natural. Like I'd be willing to admit, like most of my life has been like, if I'm not the leader, it somehow ends up that I become it, kind of deal. And to be honest, it's something that I'm getting older, I try to like be hyper aware of, because it feels like, are you just bull in a china shop, just running stuff around until people basically have to listen to you? But so I think to some level it was natural, but most of the team, or at least we chose it based on a tournament just asked it of us. And it started as like just somebody fill this void. And then eventually it was like, people start interviewing the captain a little bit more, wanting to know more with it. And because of that, then it did draw a little bit more attention from some of the players at different points, to where even there was a moment where we had like a final vote on who would be that captain. In certain moments. So it definitely does create a weird power dynamic that isn't as intuitive or natural, I think, as you think it to be. It's actually funny. This relates to not just the captain, content creators under games is something I think that's super overlooked on like the dynamic of being on a team is, this is the guy getting all the fans. This is the guy getting all the views in between. He's worried about his own stream all the time. What if we have a bad week? Do you turn to his stream? But his stream's half the reason you have a fan base on your team in the first place, right? And so it's like, how do you go against your brand versus the whole team? And that's, to some extent and for different reasons, the same dynamic that exists with the captain.
Right.
He's going to get those interviews and other things. And so for our team, at first it was kind of natural and we were so loose that it was just like, Dread, just do it. And to be honest, I was one of the more just attentive to logistics of life at that point in time. So it made it easy. And then once they started getting more attention, then it became a spot people wanted. And I basically left it at I never wanted it. It is only if you put me and vote me into this position that I will do this. But the minute everybody says, we don't want you, I mean, what is a captain if the people aren't viewing him as the captain, right? It becomes an captain, my captain situation.
What's so fascinating about these organic esports teams that don't have orgs even teaching sort of the value, the natural innate value around having figures like this is that not that by nature we're always Lord of the Flies, but there's this element of like, well, why would I make you the one in power, right? Like when
you're only hurting yourself.
Yeah, it's really it's an incredible learning.
Do you notice the irony or kind of the beauty that's happening here? Half these things that we're talking about on the shift in power dynamic is a lack of you versus the piece of that system that you're in. And that is what I think when I was saying it's more an impact of that, because I think it is layered on almost every level of being on that team and being involved, that you can see those elements hit. Even the most well-rounded, honest, humble human being, I think, will suffer from some of these dynamics just purely from, life's hard and humans are complex. Like working together, you're going to have some of that. But I think it's a very important thing to be looking at on this on all levels.
Super interesting, man. Is there anything else you feel that you learned from your time as a player that you feel like you carry with you today? I'm curious, obviously, about that transition from player to caster. We'll talk about that some more. But thinking about your time as a player, what do you look at as maybe some of the most memorable highlights, or the biggest lessons that you've learned, the most difficult moments you've learned? I know there were some pretty high ups and some pretty downs as well. Yeah. So both from team dynamic to win-loss conundrums, like things like that. Like, I'm just curious, some overall highlights of that time.
Yeah, I think I definitely learned a lot about leadership and the burden of responsibility of the relationship from a leader, right? And what I mean by that, and that might be not accurate wording, is that it's the leader's responsibility to uphold a relationship. If you consider yourself a leader and you fail to maintain a relationship with those below you, and then you look at that person and you go, but you aren't communicating with me?
Right.
That is a massive misstep on your half. Right. Which is very easy to dismiss that towards other people, as in like, I have so much on my plate, and it's like, but that is the last thing. Like, if you're a leader, you are, servicing those below you, right? And so because of that, I think I'm not going to say I nailed it, because if anything, that would probably be my first, what I think I did terribly wrong, is not balancing everybody's independent goals, needs, and wants on the team and trying to make those a thing. But I do think that, I don't know, that concept is what I wish I could have done better. Right. Is not only maintaining, I think, that relationship, but then I think that would have net better, just not only results across the board, but me be able to give them more beyond that point, because I understand what to give there. And so I think it's mainly the massive amount of weight that a leader actually has on them, and how I think also I learned a lot about how authority and leadership are very different from one another, though they're often associated as one and the same. And I think though there are lessons that you can find in a certain book, probably somewhere where somebody will explain those differences, it was being able to watch that in the real world and kind of functioning before me. And to be honest, some of it being my own responsibility, whether that be because of my role or my own actions, probably are some of the biggest things. And just really understanding that authority figures aren't leaders, and leaders aren't authority figures. Right. And great leaders can actually be people below you. And understanding that you can know nothing on a topic, know nothing about what you're working on or anything else, and be the best leader in that group. Right. Which is insane to think about. And it's like, and just, I began to appreciate a lot of leadership and what that means.
Dude, I appreciate all that you're saying so much. And you know what? In some ways, it reminds me or makes me think more about the conundrum that esports teams and players are in, because there's a level of sort of maturity required in these issues that adults struggle with. Yeah. And yet, when you look at the kinds of exposure young players and young teams are having in these really high stress scenarios, like these are lessons that adults struggle with. And, and I'm expecting you to solve this. Like at this level, that's really, really hard. It makes me think how valuable and important the idea of broader mentorship and sort of, the idea of what a coach means to a team. Like that is so valuable because these issues are really, really complex. They're, like you said, humans are very complicated. And yet I think there are wise paths through this that lend itself to more healthy interaction and more healthy performance on behalf of how a team functions that can be taught and can be coached. And yet so often a lot of these sort of esports ecosystems, these teams are kind of just on their own, like just figuring it out. And there's a beauty in that when you really see the kinds of mature issues that they're wrestling with or dealing with. But I also think there is an opportunity to serve or foster that with a stronger sense of ecosystem around that, like coaching and framework for that, right? It's super fascinating to me. I love all that stuff. Awesome, man. Well, what would you say is the highlight of your, like from just a pure competitive like joy moment? The highlight of your time as a player.
I think for me, it's always been at the Road to BlizzCon, which was basically the first really big competitive BlizzCon that they were going to do for Heroes. Dunk Train, who was the team captain for Cloud9,
shout out
who
to
was
Dunk Train.
Shout out to Dunk, man. That guy, so basically my rival, right? My rival team, my rival role, rival team captain, but we were always good friends and always super kind to one another. I don't have a single negative thing to say about him, but we get through all of it, and we've been playing for years at this point, and what started at $20, like after 10 hours of sweat and everything to get there, is now leading to we're about to qualify for BlizzCon, right? And the two top teams went, so we both had already qualified. Anna Prost Robinson's introducing in front of the stage or whatever and talking about all of it, and has the captains come together, and I get to see Dunk there, and we just kind of have a moment where you kind of look and you see like almost a moment of something is resonating, right? And all I said to him was, "We did it," and that's he dope. Just kind of has a bit of a shit-eating grin and just goes, "We did," and that for me was like that was all I was hoping for, is me and all the Cloud9 guys who I have a lot of high praise for and appreciation, being the bad guys, but also being at every event with me and hanging out and stuff, to get what we had basically been, again, playing for nothing for and playing for so long to try and get, knowing we had already done it. And now it's like, it's going to play out. Who cares who wins? Right. We made it, right? Yeah. That meant a lot. And to have that from a frenemy, like the counterpoint, but also an ally, was really cool.
Man, what an interesting moment to think, because I would think it'd be, when we won this or this moment in front of everybody, but such a quiet, powerful moment. I love that. It's really cool. It speaks to so much. It speaks to all the hard work and all the the hope and the belief, and wow, could this really be a thing? Video games, can you believe it? Right?
Yeah.
It's like all boiled down into this one quiet but loud moment from the outside. Right?
No, it's funny. I can watch it play back, and like you would never really know, right? Like it's kind of just, it had to be the two people in that moment to really appreciate it. And
dude, thank you for sharing that. That's really cool. Okay, so let's talk about that transition to being on the other side, being on the camera side and talking about games. And I know that's been an interesting road for you. I love that you've had this perspective on both sides, because I think you've seen esports, from the grassroots side of passion-driven, but also from the very corporate and sort of presentational, almost pseudo-marketing side of big games as well. And, first off, what was that transition like? Like, were there things that kind of surprised you about that side versus the other? What were some of the initial impressions you had? Like, were you concerned? What were your goals? I just want to hear a little bit get me in the mindset of that transitional weight, and what were your hopes and fears?
It was weird. It was weird. I think for to put my ego out there, I guess some people would say it looked easy, and it didn't feel very easy. Right. It felt kind of natural, for being if you're a leader of thinker within your region in your game for as long as I was, that translation to talk about the game should be pretty easy, especially if you can formulate a sentence. And I'd like to think I can do both. but it still wasn't as smooth as at least I interpret it. And that's because, commentary is way harder than people give it credit for, is one thing I will say. Number two is like, though I had stuff to say about the game, like how do you say it, and like you can have a great point. Yeah. You can be the best analyst in the world. You can basically see the future. Mm-hmm. If you have a crutch word that you say in your 8 points that you make through, I'm probably going to stop listening to you, let you know on Twitter, and like all those negative things, right?
All people hear is the one word.
Exactly. And so that's
there's a practice piece to this. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's the level of like those new mistakes, which I think would detract from what I thought I was bringing overall, like made it very difficult to find value in myself and what I was doing. To be completely honest, it probably took 2 years of being a commentator before I stopped thinking of myself as a player.
But you know what, dude? That makes so much sense to me because, like, it is such a foreign thing to be on this side of cameras.
Yeah.
The lights, the sound, the crew, the expectations, the amount of, like, you're on nowness. Like, who gets to practice that outside of practicing it when doing it, right? Yeah. It's not like we walk around with studios that you get to train or rehearse or practice. Like, it is something you had to do in real time live, right?
Yeah.
And I have so much respect for that in a lot of ways because there are practices like acting or theater or that are close to what we're talking about here, but unless that's something you've been spending a lot of time doing at a pretty high level, like you're really learning on the job in some ways. And that's a high pressure scenario to be subject to the amount of criticism, the amount of exposure. Are you saying smart things? Are you saying silly words repeatedly? Like that's a high pressure scenario, man.
Yeah.
How do you feel like that affected you? And
I think I would say the competitor inside me needed it. The more pressure, probably the better. I'm probably more likely to see me really try and get in my own head and like find a way to be conscious as you're producing it, which like while you are on this side is that weird level of like there is a mental shift of like what does it look like as I do this type of thing, right? And what is that going to be interpreted of? So, I mean, like what is the feel of the show from that standpoint compared to my own? And so, I think that all those were a thing, and that the transition into casting did come. I did one event, and suddenly it was like, do you want to do them all? And so, like, there was a level, like, it felt kind of lucky in the fact that it kind of landed on my lap as well. And a majority of that was I was one of the first, like, ex-pros to kind of be willing to consider that direction. But I would say definitely presentation and, like, how to go about those things and, like, was all challenging, but I would say the bigger leap for me was actually not only just being the ex-Heroes guy, but being the ex-pro. And I think working out of that mentality was harder for me than anything else I could have done, because even still to this day, I would say more often than not, people who follow my career, if you ask them, what is the value of Dread or what do you like about Dread, it's probably more so on the ex-player and the insight coming from those areas. When in reality, if you want to survive in this ecosystem, those are some of the last routes you should probably aim for because they're so niche and specific to a game, which, wait for that game to fail, you'll fail amongst with it, right? And so, that I think is the biggest part, is like getting out of showing to people who don't value those moments why those moments are valuable, but then also showing that just because you can do those doesn't mean that you should be stuck to that.
Right. Yeah.
And that's where I think when I view myself, if you were to ask me, Dreads, what's the problem with your casting career right now? Is I sit in a weird problem of being very easy to be put on the analyst desk to give you let me tell you about when this is smart, because I can't tell people why is that information not relevant in the moment while it was happening without overwhelming the audience, and that's where you go, well, they overwhelm. It's like, but why can't I be the guy to challenge myself to do it right for the first time ever, right? And it's like, but what if I could have sparked this because I knew this that you couldn't have got until after, or something like that. And then also working it the other way around, not only just being like, why is that valuable over there, but if you can do play-by-play, right? Yeah. More often than not, then it's like, well, the minute the guy's got to think, like, I don't know if we can, like, we got to get somebody else. Do we have a game expert? Is there a game expert around, right? And so I guess trying to get that out there and, like, I don't know, I'm kind of, like, in my mind, like, doing my own mold, too. So those things have all been the most hard and overwhelming to overcome.
I can say I had a few opportunities to sort of, connect with you during that process, like, early on. And I feel like we've had these touch points, whether that's BlizzCon or whatever, X tournament or, here's at the dorm or whatever. And it was awesome to watch your process. I think you have always struck me as someone in a similar way to myself who's like obsessed with trying to be as good as possible at a thing, you know. And it's this inability to sort of allow mediocrity to dwell, you know.
Yeah.
And it's almost like this, I don't know, like disdain for anything that you see or witness as like something that could be better, or compromise, right? Like, dude, I can't do this, right? Like, it should be better, therefore, why? You know, like, compromise is brutal for me. It's like, I get that we have to do it, but like, next time, no. Like, it happened this time, right? We had to make this decision for X reason, but whatever we need to shore up against that next time, dude, like, no way. Like, we can't be doing that all the time, right?
Yeah.
And I'm curious about that side of you. You're very passionate. You're very driven, and even in both as a captain of a pro team to a member of a broadcast team, you know, are there moments where you feel like that part of your personality has been difficult for the job at hand, or even like too much for somebody, right? Like where you're just like, Dread, you're Dread, it's too much. Just it's too much, right? Like because I've had moments like that too, where I feel like I have to realize not everyone sees the world the way that I do, and that's actually okay. That's a beautiful thing. It doesn't mean they're wrong. Like, there's different perspectives, but I'm curious what that sort of personal sense of drive and passion that I think anyone who knows you has a sense that you kind of come innate with. Like, what has that been like in these roles, and how has that been positive or negative?
I would say it's definitely a gift and a curse. Like it absolutely has positives. I would say probably, I don't know, maybe more negatives than positives, but I'm still trying to figure out all of that as it goes on. On a positive sense, I can almost woo people into my will and my direction, my motivation, whatever's got me going. I can spark others to get going a little bit faster and quicker over an idea, and something that might be daunting or unapproachable suddenly becomes invigorating a little bit more. I think I have a sense of that, and I think it's just byproduct of being pretty polarizing. It inspires polarizing responses, so because of that, I think instinctually can rustle some feathers pretty quick as well. All it takes is like that amount of energy to come anywhere. And think about it, like if you haven't had your cup of coffee that day, you're already set off. Like, I don't like this human being. Like,
be so hard.
Exactly. There's so many ways to like do that incorrectly that I think you're more prone to messing things up, I think, than helping them. But in those moments where you do have a relationship to where like there's just raw trust and understanding, I think that you can utilize that to really kind of skyrocket the world. But no, like I think on camera, it's great. If anything, it's a massive advantage. I have something that takes literally zero thought, zero effort.
Natural.
It is a actual me, and if anything, it's like learning to dial that down, so you aren't taking the show over, right? And it's like, Dread, we know you've like been hogging the mic for 45 minutes. Like, that's what I have to learn, is like, how do I hide
that
all
team
of this
side of the broadcast piece? Like, where's too much?
Exactly. So I'm way more always focusing on that. So it definitely has the positives in that side. But when it comes to like working together off the mic, right? Like, I think it'd be more prone to like in those type of situations, talking about a show, the direction of the show, or anything else. You get a wild hair, or somebody has a really cool, and you're like, oh, what if we can do this? I can see people just going like, that's too far, or not in the right area, and things like that. And I think I'm even worse in the fact that my body language matches my passion, which
you physically go.
Have you noticed every time I sit in interviews, like anybody at home, if you would like watch Dreadnaught interviews, you'll notice every time you can see his legs, he's always got his legs crossed and he's got one hand on his. And this is because this is the only way I can sit still without being like let me tell you why this is going to be awesome, right? And like I get so energetic that it becomes a problem. And I mean, I can 100% tell you that, like, I have multiple times in very not good situations had people interpret what is literal just raw passion and interest as like, is this dude about to fight me? Right? Like, and is he aggressive?
Am I in trouble?
Yeah, no, I think I've genuinely had people like walk away going, I can't tell if that guy was one wrong word away from punching a wall.
Right.
or like, doing it. And it's like, and it is so, that is so not even close to who I am. Not even like I'm
laughing
punching
because I just know
like,
that's real. I've been in moments where I'm like, oh dude.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen with you right now.
And it's like, cause I'm pacing, like that's how I organize my thought. Like there's so much going on, and it's just, and no, it has been really challenging to learn how to utilize that, because I think it took a long time, but I've confidently got to the point where I'm like, this is a strength. Like don't let Definitely them tell you that this isn't okay, because it is. It's just learning on controlling the beast, if you will. You know.
No, that's fair. That's fair, man. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the more I guess business / corporate side. By the way, how we doing, Tim? We checking in on you. We good?
You're 75% through the mag, so keep it going.
That's we got my man Tim Morten behind the camera.
Yeah.
Can you believe that? Super awesome. Blizzard, Heroes, we talked about that. But at this point, you've worked for a number of large kind of esports organizations at this point. You've done work with Twitch, obviously Apex Legends stuff, Rocket League. I'm curious to get even your perspective on what it's like working with a variety of companies like this. What do you feel like? I'm not looking for information on specific companies and how they do things, but what are your thoughts specifically even about the idea of developer-owned leagues? And esports obviously started from a very grassroots place with games like StarCraft 2 and Quake and the like, and it was FGC even around Street Fighter, like very organic. And now it's become this much more, marketing driven and promotional piece for companies who take that stuff under their belt. Like, I don't know. I'm just curious to get your take, because you've seen a variety of angles on it, even more than someone like myself. You've worked with a variety of companies at this point. Like, what are the strengths of that? What are things that might concern you? How does it impact the pure spirit of the competitive thing that's at work there? I don't know. I don't really know what I'm getting at here. I guess I'm mostly trying to get your feedback on the ways in which esports are starting to become much more brand-centric and brand promotional in some ways. The strengths of that, and maybe even some of the weaknesses of it as you perceive it from your perspective.
There's a lot to say on all of how this is going along, like with the esports. I would say, like, the first thing is like, with like the production and like how things are going right now, like with production, is like one thing that is like always a pretty frustrating piece to see is like there's just so many moving parts in like putting together a show, right? Sure. And like while trying to balance so many different shows, I think it's probably better. Like, let's look at it as like, you and I make a game. We want to put on a show for our game because we want to market it. We maybe want to make an esport league. We get a production company. They put on the show for us, right? What if we didn't like that and we want it to be different, right? Mm-hmm. How do we make that better, other than just giving more and more money and giving a lot of that control over to a production company, which seems like the mainstream thing, other than you going like, we'll buy it all ourselves, we'll do it ourselves, which happens, but it's such a massive endeavor that you have to already show a quality of the audience to be able to even take that kind of risk, that more often than not, it's probably not in your best interest. So like third-party productions are relevant and heavily promoted due to that problem, but because of that, their business models have to also be willing to take in as many things and directions that they can, and because of that, you're unlikely to, for long-standing leagues, see a growing, increased, and improved product, right? And so, and that would be I think the biggest standard practice that is like, I don't always necessarily love to see, because it's very common that it, like any show that you go into, that it be this like, well, to be honest, that level of mediocrity you were talking about before, to see kind of coexist, and like how it be frustrating. That's a more often than not, that's the approach, because it's how you can sustain that model and get it to that point. And that it's unlikely to go like, we want a massive league and we have a vision and we want you to be able to produce that on our behalf. It's a very low chance that for anything less of like way too much money, that you will find that to be a reasonable option under those people. And I think that's been one thing on the back end that like I've always had frustration, because as a talent, it makes, especially if you're a recurring figure on that show, really difficult to go like, how can I make this better and I can improve and so many other things on that over time, and it can get stale. And so I think that's definitely one weird element on the back end of things and how it's all functioning. And then I also think there's a whole nother aspect of esports that is like, how does this play into this all? That isn't even like esports as much as it is like Twitch / what is becoming just media consumption over personal streaming, right? Because like that isn't an esport necessarily, but it is competitive content to some extent, right?
And it drives extreme viewership.
And it drives so much viewership.
At a cost that's like...
Exactly. Yeah. And it's so on an independent person that they can basically spike that rate to be so ridiculous that we clearly have a bubble going with personal streamer brands, and the value that they have is not necessarily directly equal to the audience of which they actually can bring in, especially if you're bringing them off of their channel. Right, which is, again, a whole nother topic, but they hold so much success and weight over the market that it almost is more important to control and have positive relations with them than anything you could have ever done on your esports side, which was the kind of core thought process behind esports as it started forming early on, like post Quake and stuff, with the first establishing of like CS is getting its revamp, like everybody's starting to like CSGO, like, you know, it's going to be a thing. And, you know, League of Legends Season 1 just finishes and everybody's seen the dream hack and it's like, oh, it's kind of there, you know, like it started brewing. And that mentality of like what it was supposed to become is like actually the independent streamer, which is, for better or for worse, a really terrifying place right now. Like,
man, how interesting to think about that. Like, you know, in some ways, when you think about these large esports spectacles, they do sort of boil down to kind of marketing initiatives, right? And the amount of money you're willing to put towards marketing your game. And maybe that means a league to foster this premium version or premium look at your game, right? It costs, at the end of the day, it's a money cost, right? And around like, how is this affecting the exposure of our game, the purchase of our game, the growth of our game, that kind of thing, right? But you're right, when you almost look at that, you're like, we could either do this incredible esports league, or we could do this promo with this individual, right? Comes at X cost, right? Like, it's really weird to think that that kind of decision could be making an impact on the idea of what esports could be.
I'd be willing
what
to
it
argue,
even represents.
I'd be willing to argue it has a bigger impact than just that. I'd be willing to argue it is changing what games are being made.
Interesting.
I'd be willing to say that the mobile market is actually only that much more appetizing because of the lack of streaming done in that space currently, beyond the fact of it having a natural, more profitable, just standard practices there, right? Like, it makes it far more likely that if I was to develop a game today, I would want to aim for the mobile market way more than anything that would ever make it to Twitch, because the odds of me succeeding and not being at the basically the will of whatever those streamers that are a part of my ecosystem is way worse. So I want off of that. Like, I don't want a part of that. And
that's interesting.
And I think it could shift with like clearly what they're calling the streamer wars, you know, is clearly inevitable ahead of us, which is going to be Facebook getting their hand into things, YouTube getting their hand into things, trying to like, who's going to win this streamer battle, because we know the streaming is super valuable. But like, no, I honestly think it's a very big, weird kind of tool that plays into all elements of esports, because I don't know, I think that like when I think of just esports in general and like how it's sourced, right, like and just gaming as it's shifted, at least from my eye and my perspective, has been, you know, gaming was super hard. You put in a quarter, you die, you have to spend another quarter. Eventually I can play from my home as long as I get an investment. Those games probably going to be like a decent amount of difficulty, but they don't want me to hate my life, right? And so we see that shift. Eventually we get to the point where games are like middle of the pack and we can start playing with others. We realize the value of communities. We start doing things like lobbies and being able to do custom games. And then gaming blows up. Once you can hang out with your friends, it turns out you love to play games, right? And it's like, but those tools to promote that community and hit that boom are all necessary to do anything esports. The second you want to do anything esports, it's basically organized community, right? And so it's like to do an esport without lobbies, which ironically and hilariously enough is actually something that kind of gets done in modern day, like custom servers and things like that are forced to just put out an esport. And it's like, but the steps that we saw historically and culturally to get to this point where community comes before your esport. Your esport doesn't come before your community. And the in-game tools also match that paradigm. But yet our practices when it comes to introduction to do we get into esports is not thinking about a community. It is merely focused on the marketing backend, which I think it's a huge problem.
It's something we've gotten before the horse in so many.
Oh no, we're just like, we'll just give this the old, flip around here. I think that's a pretty big weird problem too. I think on like esports in general, definitely from a developer standpoint. Like how many are like, that head honcho of above is like, can we make this an esport? I've heard that those are pretty good, right? And everybody else down below is going like, you can't even get 10 people in the same lobby, so I don't know how you expect that to go down, let alone 160 people in an open bracket, all the other elements that go into it, and observing and like.
Yeah, observing is interesting, man. The visual experience of games too, so fascinating. It's a whole other interesting topic.
Yeah.
So interesting, dude. Yeah, man, what a fascinating time we're in as it relates to these things, because the beauty of esports and the moments that we all know and love around competitive, shared, communal stories, even like this team versus this team, and what that means. Like, it is fascinating to see that now that leagues and brands have sort of fallen under the kind of ownership of developers. Like, it's complex.
So this is this is where that passion's about to come out, and this is where I'm just like, where they're gonna be like, yo, is Dread gonna punch a wall?
Dude.
But okay, so like, I don't. It is wild. Like, how many? Oh gosh, there was something that sparked that originally off what you just said.
Developers. We're talking about
it's the owner of the game. So okay, so when you think about any other sport, because I think that's the thought process a lot of people have, is like, well, we have leagues and other games, and we have other things that exist in the modern day that we can use as a case example that have been 200 years to look at. There's a major difference from all of those and what we do, and that is because nobody owns the damn game of football. Nobody owns the game of baseball. There is no such thing as someone up above that tells you how you can, where, how approach the game of baseball. And if you fail to do so, you just can't play baseball. That is what the gaming ecosystem actually is, because you are using their art, their effort, their years of getting that to exist, that it is not about that community.
Right.
It is about the game. And I think that shift, and that is where the clash comes in. And I don't know what I think the solution is, or even if there necessarily is one, but like, from my perspective, that is like the game itself is worried about the sales and everything else, and not so much on the community, which makes total sense. But unlike traditional sports and everything else that force community, right? Because nobody can take it away, right? And I think there
fosters it by its nature.
Exactly. And I think that is a super, super problematic element of esport and game development. And I don't know. We'll learn if Dread is insane, because like, we have case examples of the opposite, right? Which would be basically franchising before a traditional league, which I think it would be very fair to say that at least Overwatch League is a very good example of basically neglect and sacrificing of organic grassroots possible development and growth through that 1 year gap between the release of Overwatch and the announcement of, or the actual Overwatch League coming out. And then it's like, well, there's a lot of money. There's a lot of the brands. No one asks about community, but we don't have to anymore, so who cares, right? And it's like, as long as all those other elements are done and touch up enough, is it enough? This is where I'll tell you, I don't think so, not at all. And I think when you look at some of the numbers, they indicate I might be right, but we still don't have enough time to, I think, confidently throw down a gauntlet and be like, told you so, you know what I mean? Like, so. But I think that all is related to community and that thought process around that community and the aging of gaming in general. Like, I think it's, I don't know. I honestly spend hours in my kitchen, like, thinking about this kind of stuff, just going like, maybe I made a terrible mistake, because like, I'm completely lost in all this.
Dude, I think competitive gaming moments and shared moments, these sort of, like we talked about it, shared storytelling. I mean, that's what esports is when you really get to the heart of it. Like, the things that we love to watch in competitive moments, they are evolving stories. They're stories of this player or this team versus this player, this team, whatever, right? And that will always be a part of what we do. And obviously games are not going anywhere. And so I think esports is not going anywhere for better or worse. Like, there will always be these moments, but I do think we're in this interesting shift, right? Where the complexity around what these experiences should look like, or even how they should be fostered or nurtured, like, it's really hard to know what the right answer is, because it's very complex, and there's a lot of business and a lot of money all tangled up in it right now. And but nah, man, I think your love for the natural expression of what competitive games looks like, and your ability to share that and unpack it for audiences, the need for that's not going anywhere. So
hopefully.
No, that's super, super interesting. What do you think of the trend or expectation around crowdsourced prize pools?
Oh, baby.
I think this is fascinating to me. Is this a good thing? You know, is there a right way to do this? You know, is there a company you feel like is doing it the best or well? What do you make of crowdsourced prize pools and their ability to foster esports? Because especially in light of what we were just saying, where the need to foster community is really how you leverage and promote that kind of enthusiasm. And yet maybe that's not happening in the way that it could or should, right? Like, I don't know. It's an interesting conundrum, and I find it fascinating that esports specifically has found its way into this in a way where it almost feels like if you're not doing it this way, or there isn't some component of this, you're either leaving money on the table or not leveraging your community or squeezing them in a way around this enthusiasm. And yet there is an element of like goodness out of the idea that like, hey, if you want to see this or you want to contribute or you want to reward your players, then do this thing. But the tension between, business interest as it relates to said thing and the true goodness of that side of the story is kind of muddy.
It is. It's muddy enough that like, I think I would leave, in a blanket statement, it's in theory great. In practice, who knows, right? Like on how good are they? Because I think it's amazing. Conceptually, it's like, we want to contribute and help, but like we don't have all the money in the world. There are millions about you out there who care enough to be like, this is worth $2. If every one of you does that, that is an insane prize point, right? That is going to change lives and everything. And I think that is super appealing, a part of the crowdsourcing and everything else. So, but where that does go wrong and the muddiness comes in on, I want to bring it back to the question of, but who owns football?
Right.
Because they do own the game, right? And my question would just be, so let's say they wanted to crowdsource a tournament that played a funny version of that same game under that same tournament with the same level of production. Would that developer be equally as gung-ho to promoting that and benefiting that? And I think more often than not, the answer is no, because it's not in the way they intend the game to be viewed, which then makes you go, I don't like it then. You only want the crowdsourcing, you want their help whenever it benefits your ideas. Right. But the minute it became their ideas to benefit them, you're like, we don't know about that, chief. And that's where I'm like, well, then that isn't you crowdsourcing for the sake of organic, you care, we're gonna bring that back in. That's you looking at, we don't want to spend this money with somebody else, right? And I think that's where I go, no developer, at least for me right now, is at a point where they have shown a level of authenticity and genuine interest to be focused on that, to where I could trust that sentence. If they told me that, I'd be like, nah, you keeping as much as you can, right? Like, you're doing whatever you can. And I think that comes down to the idea that the game is owned. It is not a universal thing, which changes the idea around a community. And if you don't promote that community within your other actions itself, then you can't look to me for help in the first place.
Yeah. Did you see the situation with Blizzard around the prize pool for the WoW Arena thing that happened, where
I heard a little bit of it.
There was something about there was like some confusion in the communication around like how Blizzard was going to provide like $500,000 for this tournament if for some reason the crowdsourcing didn't hit that cap. But if for some reason the crowdsourcing hit that cap, Blizzard wasn't going to provide the $500,000. But the wording was kind of vague, and that didn't really come out until the end when they announced the prize pool.
See, and that would be like a model that, like, not even considering the practice otherwise, I probably frown upon.
Oh, for
like,
sure.
Because like it's literally just going like, this is going to happen inevitably. Like, if you told me we will up until this and everything you do we match, I go, exactly. I'm on board, because you were again, you're willing to foster that. If you wanted to, we will better your circumstance. That makes sense. You're promoting a community. You aren't just looking for where can the money come from other than us. And that, again, it's actually crazy. Like, for me being the sweaty gamer who's like more on the hardcore side of things, that like, I think if you looked at when we first met to now that I'm the guy sitting in front of you and go, let me tell you why community matters. You'd be going, whoa, because like that is so not who I am. Like, I'm the first to probably be on the opposite side of that spectrum. And that's too touchy-feely and stuff, but I do think it has a cultural impact, which I think has a long-standing, overarching impact.
That's interesting stuff, dude. I'm curious what you think are the best competitive experiences to watch online right now at the moment. Like, if you look at eSports, and I'm just curious to get your take on that, right? Like, both from a presentational place where it's fun to commentate and all of that, but it's also really rocking to watch, you know, like killer moments that represent what competitive gaming's all about. Like, what do you feel like are the best competitive experiences to watch?
So like, it's important to highlight there's two different versions, I think, of that in my mind, right? You have leagues, which are going to be more long-term storytelling and emotional investment versus I just want to see competitive video games and drama, which is one-off event, right? Because if you're going to do one-off events, I think you cannot not immediately name the international, right? Like
Yeah,
it is too amazing. You know, it is the reason that crowdsourcing question is even a topic. You know, do we even consider that in esports if it wasn't for the amazing flagship version of that within their product? So I say that has to be international is 100%. TI is way too good. So I would suggest watching that. It's graphics, everything is beautifully done. Like the only thing I would say, in my personal opinion, is like if you aren't into the game, sometimes the commentary can be a little bit dry / hardcore, but you'll still get what you came for. Other than that, I would be like League of Legends World Finals for one-off events. I think you have to look at those. Their opening ceremonies from a media standpoint, they are an entertainment.
Yeah.
When you watch a World Championship for League of Legends, they understand the entertainment factor very, very well and everything. So I definitely would promote their product. Like other than that, to be honest, I don't feel like there's anything that I would immediately be like I can comfortably like. Okay, that's not true. For one-offs, Counter-Strike.
Yeah.
Counter-Strike would be another one.
Okay,
For the game itself, 100% Counter-Strike. Most of the MOBAs, I would say, for the most part, when it comes to shooters, I don't think all of them are as digestible. I think Counter-Strike is kind of one in of its own. No flame, but I personally like Overwatch. I don't think holds its comparatively to the other
hard to watch from, especially if you don't know the game modes.
Yeah, and I also am just beyond the art and other elements. I personally think class-based shooters. I don't know how I feel about those from a competitive thought process. Right. So I would definitely say I think it has to be the international when it comes to one event, and then when it comes to games, definitely League of Legends and Counter-Strike would be my. Yeah. Somebody wants to get into esports, this would be it. Past that, I would say like I think production-wise and stuff maybe not up to snuff, but when it comes to the actual game, 100% Rocket League. I think Rocket League is maybe the best game in the world when it comes to that element, or at least the
intuitive nature of
and like promoting like the feeling of what you give a game versus what it gives back. I will tell you that concept, there is no game at every level of how good you are that truly gives you something back and something to look forward to on if you just wanted to play casually or if you wanted to play super serious. So I would say those
fighting games. Where would you put that on?
So fighting games, man. I'd be willing to promote fighting games more within esports if it wasn't for like the origin of where they come from and mixed with the commentary and like the media which they present. I don't think is digestible. At least not enough for me to promote.
It's very like of the language of the. Is that
the fact that some of the most famous lines in all of commentary, and let alone is, oh, happy feet, wombo combo, right? Like the fact that, like, where are you at? Where, you know? Exactly. Some of those moments that can exist within that, though I get it, and it's entertaining. It's just like, I think there's a place for it. But if you were to ask me, like, show somebody esports, I would not be showing them what looks like their basically worst nightmare and all of their bad assumptions already about who we are coming true. It's a bunch of sweaty guys in a room with a bunch of TVs who didn't shower, who play against one another until one of you wins. And you act like you're cool at the end of the day, which... I don't know. I feel like I'm smashing and like bashing them to the ground because I have nothing but admiration and an endearing thought process towards fighting games in general. But I do think their Watch Us Beat Grassroots has hit its cap to where it's hurting more than it's helping.
Interesting,
I think they should just put literally 20% of the professionalism they see everywhere else, sprinkle it in, keep on topic just most of the time, and you're golden. Like it could be loose fitting, you know what I mean? But I just think it's too far off right now.
No, that's good. It's good. It's good to get your perspective on that. What do you think the next area of growth in esports will be? Like, what do you think? What do you think the industry in general is going to turn to? I mean, we've seen these, especially with the advent of BR, we've seen these large-scale tournaments with like hundreds of players in real time.
Yeah, I don't think those will keep up.
Yeah, it's too expensive. It's got to be too expensive.
It's a logistics problem, and it's even like people are not even considering that. Like, imagine doing a PUBG tournament online with an open qualifier that you were competing in from an admin standpoint alone. Which those are the elements that like if you weren't the guy competing in the tournament, very few people understand like how much manpower it takes to siphon through 3,000 teams and figure out which ones were the ones supposed to be where, and if that was not cheating in the process. So like I definitely think that's that you aren't going to see as many big lobby stuff, at least for esports. It doesn't, I don't think, make that much sense unless gaming gets bigger and better and keeps going. I think I think you might see a little bit of fighters. I honestly think we're gonna hang out in limbo for a while, and then I personally think that we're gonna either hit our next, what I'm going to call a quality innovation, which I think people look at auto battlers and they would be telling me, Dread, why aren't you talking about auto battlers? Those are clearly going to fill that role. I don't think so. So far, esports as a trend showed that any games that have heavy amounts of RNG and randomness typically depend a lot on the personalities at hand to carry the esport and the entertainment factor, because the skill level, there's only a 0.5 difference between every one of them, and the RNG is out of their control, so who kind of cares to some extent. So that personality helps carry that over, and I don't think that's doable long term for massive amount of content. So I think like RNG oriented games will likely take a step back. So that's where I think auto battlers, there'll be a place, there will be content. Will it be the esports, baby? Have you seen auto battle? No, I don't think so. I don't think BRs are, for the logistical problem that they have. So I think it's going to be either a baby like BR, right? Like a toned down kind of version, like a little bit more like Apex kind of tried to do something of that, or I think it'll be on its own, or it'll be a revamp of, I can't tell if this is my own personal bias coming in, because I think when I talk to RTS players, they always go, wait for it to come back. But for me, I personally think that MOBAs have never died. They aren't at the forefront, but unlike what we saw with the massive trend of like when Twitch hits its rise, MOBAs come into play and RTSs start differing, we haven't lost the interest in MOBAs. Which I think shows a lot. And that being said, you could argue it's mainly just League. So are you defending the whole genre or just League? And that's where I go, I don't know. But I do think at least that has enough going for it. And Dota has still a lot of traction going for it. You know, Heroes doesn't have an esport really, so it's not necessarily a part of that conversation anymore. But at least for those two, there is enough going on that I think it's likely to be a, hey, remember League of Legends? Or remember MOBAs? Because I just think top-down plays very well from a viewer standpoint, too.
And obviously that's a strength for RTS in that sense. There's almost an innate viewership. The camera angle itself is an innate observer camera in some ways. What did you take on that? Do you think we will see a rebirth of RTS? I know we have, Reforged coming for War 3 and stuff like that. What's your take on RTS? Is it just a classic genre that, how does it find its rebirth, or is it going to be just another generation down the road?
And so, like, have you ever played, like, Sekiro or Dark Souls or something like that, right? Like, I feel like I would put them amongst, like, those type of games where there's so much beauty and, like, nuance and, like, cool elements of that game. But most of the people that play it, though there is a small group that will die for that game, that will probably go, it just wasn't my style because it wasn't smooth, or it wasn't this, or it wasn't that. And RTSs innately have too many layers. They complex. And the minute you simplify them, you might as well make it like a weird Sims mobile game, right? Like I think it constantly has the problem of being, to be great, it has to be a certain level of complexity. To hit that level of complexity, it basically makes the floor problem, ceiling floor, right? Like how good your ceiling is versus your floor. The floor of RTSs is so absurdly low that you literally can't load into the game and like play it without already having a foundation. You don't have a main building like to start collecting stuff, right? Like the game isn't even started until you know what you're doing. And so that in and of itself, I think, puts the bar too high for them to ever dominate. Like it's not like they can't come out. It's not like they can't hold their own. But if you told me Warcraft 3 was the biggest game, remastered over the next 5 years, I'd look at you and go, like, you're crazy. That's not happening.
Interesting. What do you think? Do you think there's a place for esports that maybe don't have sizable player bases but are really awesome and fun to watch? Like, do you think there's?
I do. I think some
maybe
of
there's
those
a place
might
for that with RTS where, when you watch an incredible StarCraft game, it's unbelievable. Like, especially if you have a small sense, or maybe the production is doing a good job of manifesting this, but showing the skill level required, showing the amount of expertise that goes into all the micro managing that's going on. And obviously that's not a game experience that necessarily everyone wants to torture themselves through, but maybe it's a viewership experience that people want to appreciate. Like, I'm curious if you feel like that's maybe even a trend or a viable path for esports too. I don't know.
I feel like one thing that esports does have in like as a problem, I think in general, is that like what you were talking about right there is like with the intuition and the empathy from the viewer to the game. I actually think that's like one of, like on the note of Rocket League, one of the biggest problems the game has is like it's super easy to get behind, and like you can show any average Joe what Rocket League is doing, and you'd be like, okay, that was a goal. I get that. They're flying cars, but you have no idea how hard that flying car maneuver was. Right. And I can give you a controller, and you can play for 20 minutes, and you can go, wow, it's really hard to control, like even hit the ball. Right. And you can play it for an hour, and you can be like, wow, it's really hard to jump and get off the ground. And they'd be like, you understand these guys are not hesitating even half of a second flying, doing all that what you just did perfect every single time, right? Like, and it's like you don't even understand like how difficult that would be. So I do think that there is definitely, all games have a problem with that level of empathy, not only because it doesn't matter if the game is intuitive. That's not all. You have to find a way to show the audience why everybody else is better than you, or why those guys you're watching are better than the audience at home.
Yeah. Interesting, man. You talked a little bit about personal streaming and its sort of impact on esports, maybe even from looking at it from the marketing perspective. But I'm curious, as someone who's in this space, especially as a personality, like, it's a little bit of a different topic in some ways, but do you ever feel like because you're in this space, you ought to or have to stream? Like, is there this natural sense of pressure on you are a gaming personality, therefore you must stream? And if you don't stream, you're underserving or under maximizing your potential. Like, do you feel like there's this natural sense of pressure there?
I definitely think there's enough pressure in, like, if it's not streaming, it has to be YouTube. I think it's one of those two. Like, if you don't have something constant of content coming out on your behalf, then you absolutely do. I think streaming, especially for games in general, it's become more popular on Twitch, and I think it's a little bit easier. And I think at first, it's way more connected. Like, I mean, you've done both, so you know. But like, they putting up a YouTube video and having maybe one comment, it's very easy to just miss very little interaction. Right. Even though nobody's going to walk into your stream, the second one person gets there, you feel like, oh, this can be a conversation. Like, you can stick onto that. And I think that does change the dynamic. But I think you always focus on at least having one of those go out. And I think for most, it is streaming because it's easiest to get behind early on. Right. But I can tell you, me personally, not as much. And I've got, I don't know, I think I have my own weird ideas and feelings about it all in general. But I do think that the esports space and esports personalities and everything, there is definitely you could be doing something else, right? Like, there's always more that you could be doing. You could be working on your Instagram or like working on your Twitter, and doing a million other things and basically be a personality, And I think it really comes down to like you defining the rules of who you think you are as a personality and what you think that means to you. And I viewed it as like a kind of create your own job kind of role, right? Which is probably pretty notable from my lack of Twitter like interaction ever, unless it involves something I'm doing, which then it's like just promotional, right? And I'm just a believer on like, here's my product and I mean my work ethic. Like, I want that to carry me. I don't want my Twitter follower, though. To be honest, I think a lot of people at home would be like, yeah, you're doing that wrong, because they are right. They will look at your Twitter following and they will do those things. So
it's so interesting. I guess maybe this conversation is more a commentary on the amount of pressure social media has on personalities in general, that like just doing a thing, there's all this expectation that you're going to be doing 5 other things alongside that thing. If for some reason you aren't, there's like an aspect of like, well, you're doing it wrong, or you know what I mean? But what's crazy is that the amount of pressure that puts on you as an individual to look at every platform and to try to be like min-maxing that is like exhausting. It's like, it's an interesting part of our reality right now, that just the natural sense of pressure to continue to offer more, to figure out how to be more profound and push more content specific to individual audiences. And I think as a personal brand, that comes at a high
it's cost. That's all you. You can only look at it yourself and like to separate yourself enough to be able to not take the negativity that's coming in, whether it be your own assessment of your lack of success or it be the external one coming from everybody else. It's very easy to build up.
How do you know where to draw that line for you? Is it just happiness, or that balance between, am I enjoying this and am I not? Like, how do you decide where to draw that line?
Oh, that's a tough one. I'm a real bad one. Like, I'll say like, in my chat, you were allowed to flame me as hard as you ever wanted, and I will not ban you. Like, I'm a huge believer in like, I want you to feel comfortable to say what you have to say here, even if I don't want to hear it, right? And so those type of things, and I think it would mess with me mentally to where I'm a huge believer in like, hear the bad things, because social media, in my opinion, social media is basically a way for us to feel better about our already existing opinions and neglect all those that conflict with us, right? Here's one person that conflicts with me, watch me retweet it so all the people who disagree with him will let me know that I'm right on my already existing opinion. So I try to very much promote it the other way, and so it is really hard. And I think that might be part of the reason I am kind of minimalistic on it, and I like having a sense of privacy, that like you might know who Dreadnaught is, but do you know who Wade is? Right? Like, and I think interviews and things like this might be a moment where you've heard my commentary, but have no idea who I am or how I am, even as a human being, whatsoever. But I think I draw the line off of a sense of sanity on my own level if I feel like I'm losing it at all, and reminding, I think I keep it as irrelevant as possible on in any way that I can, while also still not neglecting it, because I think it's super important to hear those thoughts. Like if somebody tells me I suck and has a thought behind it that's even well thought out, I think it is my duty to at least hear it and consider effectively.
Dude, you've been super generous in this time. I only have a couple more things I want to run by you, but one thing I wanted to know, and I know you've spoken about this in the past, but I didn't even tell you we were going to talk about this.
It's
but
okay.
I'm curious to get your feedback on this. But you went through a pretty interesting personal and even physical transition during your time, both as a player to a commentator and then beyond. Like you lost a lot of weight. You changed your lifestyle significantly. I'm interested in that from a variety of factors. I think obviously there's a question around. There's always this floating question around like games. Are they healthy? Are you spending too much time sitting down? And when you look at a pro player and they're that way, oh man, even the best of the best, this is showing you this is a problem, right? Like, I'm curious to get your take on that. Like, what do you attribute that to in your life? Like, both the transition and what it was like before to what you are now. Like, what was that for you? What made you decide, hey, I'm not what I should be physically, I want to change that? Like, was it the pressure of your job? Was it the realization of your health? Put us in your mindset there. What was the decision like? And then how did you go about doing it? Like, I'm actually curious how you equipped yourself with the knowledge and the right path. Did you feel like you went about it in a healthy way? Like, I think all those things are interesting to me.
So I think I recognized it / I want to do something about that. I think it wasn't until I started, basically I think it was once I really started transitioning into thinking of myself as a caster.
Interesting, yeah.
My looks wasn't going to change my significance to the Heroes of the Storm scene. Right? It wasn't going to increase the odds. It was what I had to say and who I was in my experience, and that was never going to shift. Now, a new game looking into me, they're going to care about the appeal I have to their audience on first glance, right? And so I think it was once I really started accepting my role as a commentator and as a caster that then made me go, I need to start taking this seriously. That being said, we were talking about me being an athlete my whole life. Like this is more my normal fitness level. So if anything, what most people in my rise to popularity early on in my career and that stuff, that was just from being a pro gamer, and I did spend a lot of time in my room to where I did gain like 20 to 30 pounds over the 2 to 3 year period. And so it was mainly like losing most of that plus like a little bit on top of it. So for me, it wasn't as like scary or like what happened to you. It was like more of like a returning to normal. And it made sense that I gained the weight from like how hard I was focusing on just always being in my room and always learning and thinking about the game. How I went about it was mainly just so I went through and my girlfriend at the time, she was a personal trainer and she had some bodybuilding experience in the past, and so we utilized not only her personal training experience mixed with some of the personal trainers she had worked under to learn about what would probably be the best nutritional balance, right, in a macro sense. Then take the body weight, calculate the macros, come up with that, do the math on a whole meal plan, came out with meal plans and how to go about it all. And within probably like a week of, let's go about this or whatever, I've got the meal plan all figured out. And then because of my sports background, I've been luckily, I used to go to a gym a lot. Like, it's not like I didn't need the, like, how do I get into a gym? I was very like, as long as you've got a squat rack and give me some breathing space, I'll feel comfortable. So I was lucky that that element felt very natural, and I have a lot of like, I know how to work out. So then it was just doing that. And the biggest motivator, I think, when I get I get this question quite a bit, especially from like heroes.
Especially
people.
you've been on camera both pre and post.
Yeah, just Liquidpedia me, and you'll be like, that was not the guy I watched in that interview. And but yeah, so like I think I always tell them if I was to give any tips, because I'm not educated on this topic, and I think that this is your literal health. Like it is not something you should take lightly. So don't take just because one guy had success. Like clearly I can just do this and that works. Right. I think that those are probably safe enough starting points. Like looking into those things from a science perspective that I feel comfortable sharing them. And then other than that, I just very much held the mentality of like, if every day you do just like one minor thing that feels like it's a little bit healthier. If you're used to eating a burger, get the burger with like not mayo that day, right? Yeah. And it's like, okay, that's not going to kill you, but like no joke, if you did that over 1 year, like you actually have no idea. Every time I try to have that mentality, within 1 month of me doing it, I go, if I keep this up, I'm going to basically stop eating / like have the healthiest mentality that like I'm like I don't know what to do. Like it annoys me quickly when I start adopting that mentality. It ramps out of control pretty quickly, and so it's just do one thing a little bit healthier. So. Because your goal is to change your lifestyle, not how you are. Right. And I think that is something, like if you wanted to change how you are, lipo is a really good solution that you can make that happen right away. And it's like, well, I want to be skinny forever. And it's like, well, then you actually have to change, which means you need time, endurance, and small changes will make you not...
as well as... There's a mental piece to it, along with having the plan and maybe even the support that you might need. Everyone needs a variety of personal support around them, to encourage them or whatever. Everyone's a little bit different in that regard.
For sure.
Right? Yeah.
And like the thing right out the gates, like most people, I feel like when they start dieting, they immediately start realizing how social food is. And that is where the support comes in, is they start neglecting their social life due to the food aspect. And then it's like, well, I can't bring my food because they'll make fun of me. Or if you do bring it, like there's a lot of ways around it. And it's just in general, there is a whole lot of support. There's a whole lot of elements. And I think you should take a lot of time to study up and look into those things and the science side of it, but also not be willing to look for that help probably in those areas. And like probably one of the most respectable things I feel like I've seen anybody do is like be willing to like reach out and be like, hey, I think it's much like budget. Like you never want to hear, nobody wants to call it and be like, guys, like this just doesn't financially make sense to me right now. Yeah.
Doesn't fit my budget.
You never want to go out there and you're never going to say those things. Nobody ever wants to go out and be like, that's not on my diet right now. Like, and so I can't do that. And it's like, there might be a solution around. And if you're willing to have that honesty, like, bringing your food is a choice, or like maybe they'll find a way to alter something to still have that social connection, but then still be able to better your life going forward. Yeah.
But it was worth it, is what you're saying.
Yeah, no, definitely.
100%.
I mean,
you feel differently. You feel
it's super weird. Like I felt like losing the weight originally, like way lighter and skinnier and stuff, and like how your body feels was definitely weird. Like running, because like I didn't run a whole lot, but then like after running, weighing like 20 pounds lighter, and then you feel like an antelope, like you're ready to jump an 8-foot wall.
Yeah,
like
totally.
you just run, like the wrong noise goes off, and you're ready to like jump like Superman, right? Like it's just jolted out of there. And then as time's gone on, now I'm focused less on like burning fat and more on like, can I actually gain some muscle? And so that's been its own weird fitness thing in its own direction of like muscles contact where they used to not, like, my bicep didn't hit there before and stuff. And so that's cool. It's been weird.
Interesting, man. Well, yeah, I obviously am a lot to say on the topic. It's interesting to get your thoughts on it for sure. And it's quite the process. It's very personal for each individual, but that constant strive for health, especially as we, the thing that we love to do and that we work on, myself included, my day-to-day, it involves a lot of standing in one place or sitting in one place, depending on where my desk is. But I need to be moving around regularly, and we need to constantly remind ourselves how physical our bodies are and the need to exercise that. So anyways, I just wanted to surface it here, but we're wrapping things up. One final question for you. I'm curious if for some reason, esports and games weren't a part of your life, or there was one thing you could do beyond what you're currently doing, what would you have chosen, or what would you have done, do you think?
Yeah, so before I dropped out of college to play professionally, I had studied, so I had like a couple of family members and just close members in my life in the state of Wyoming suffer from depression, and mental illness is a huge problem in Wyoming. And so I actually wanted to do like either public speaking or some kind of representation and work with suicide prevention and awareness in high schools in Wyoming.
Yeah.
So I think I'd go like back to that originally, or like that dream job that like, you know, money doesn't matter and like I can do whatever I want. Hands down, philosophy or teaching history. I think that education would be a dream job. Like I find I already enjoy teaching like some level in my commentary. I think you can see like I love going like, look at how complex this is, but we can master this, right? And it's like, how can we do that? How can we think about this to get to that point and do that? And I love history, and I think it's something that like everybody could use. So I think that's it. And I adore philosophy, but both of those like financial, what it takes to get there versus what you gain after is probably not worth the endeavor.
Dude, man, how interesting. I love hearing that. All right, man. Well, for those who are watching and who stuck around, how can people stay in touch with you? What are the best ways to connect with you if they want to follow you? And what do you have coming up? Is there anything they can...
Honestly, nothing. I don't have anything cool. Not right now, at least in front of me.
Well, these esports gigs always pop up pretty last minute. So.
Hey, a week in advance, you ready to fly across the country? But if you guys actually care, my Twitter is at Wade Penfold. That's probably my, as I've already belittled it like 3 times in this interview. It's probably my most active social media if I have an active one. Right. Wade_Penfold for my Instagram and things like that. And I believe YouTube is like Dreadnaught or something. Twitch is also just Dreadnaught. But I would say probably just follow on Twitter if you really have interest in all that. And thanks for having me. Honestly, it's a blast, man.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for. I know that it's hard to know what this is even going to become, but I really appreciate your belief and willingness to even chat. I love talking about these things, as you know, and hopefully the community enjoyed this conversation as well.
Yeah, man.
All right, brother. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Give you a big hug.